Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. Happy Monday morning. We're coming to you Monday morning. One, because I was on a plane for most of the day on Sunday. But two, we needed to wait and see how the transfer portal was going to shake out. And as a personnel person that I talked to last week put it, compliance doesn't always work on the weekends. So we weren't sure if everybody was going to be in. But I've got David Ubben and Max Olson, the portal authority, here with me to talk about all of the moves that may or may not be happening. And guys, Sunday we saw some action. East Lansing seems to be the most interesting place. You got Peyton Thorne, the 2-year starting quarterback for the Michigan State Spartans, in the portal. Keon Coleman, their leading receiver, in the portal. Max, what the hell happened?
Yeah, not what's the officiating term for that? Disconcerting signals? Is that what it is?
Exactly.
I mean, I think there are two separate deals there. I think the Peyton Thorne situation, you kind of get the sense that coming off a rough season in 2022 for the program, that Mel Tucker opened up that quarterback competition, and that Peyton Thorne was going to have to, despite being a 2-year starter, was going to have to keep competing with Noah Kim and Kaiten Hauser to win that job. And so he moves on as a grad transfer. I don't know. We've talked in the past about how there's some of these schools like Auburn and Florida and potentially and others that maybe they're still looking for a guy here as the calendar turns to May. But could just as easily just see Peyton Thorne ending up at another Power 5 school, maybe where he has to compete for the job. I'm interested to see how coveted he is. Keon Coleman, as soon as he hit the portal, he jumped into number 2 in our athletic best available rankings. He's a stud.
Well, so Thorne, it's interesting because it does seem like Noah Kim may have won that job. And if that's the case, I'm actually surprised we're not seeing more of these where there was a competition, but they didn't say who was going to win it coming out of spring. They said they were going to push it into the fall, but then one or all of the players were like, no, we need to know. That's actually what happened with Joe Burrow, guys. That's when it was Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins. Meyer never said who was the starting quarterback, but it felt like Joe Burrow kind of went to him and said, I need to know because I'm going to go start if you're not going to let me do that here.
Yeah.
And
these kids aren't dumb. They pick up on the vibes in the building.
Yeah.
Well, vibes and I'm a rip count guy also. Like,
yeah,
they don't release those numbers, but like they're in practice, they see, and they also see, after practice grades, you can kind of tell when you're looking in film study.
Yeah.
Like I think 100 people.
If they're treating you like the 2-year captain or not.
Yes, right? Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting because at that point when all that happened, it was what's going on there. Is Mel Tucker completely losing the program? Now, if he's just starting a quarterback who wound up being better than Peyton Thorne, I don't think that's a problem. The Keon Coleman thing is a little more distressing because you're actually losing somebody who I'm sure you were going to be relying on this year.
Yeah, that now's not the time to do that.
No,
I think that's the thing is I think Max and I talk about this all the time, but the portal is so complex because every decision in itself is a unique decision almost every time. And sometimes when you see really good players leave, okay, is somebody trying to drop a bag on them? Do they have some scheme issues? Do they have some personality issues with the coach? Like, you really just cannot paint with a broad brush of what's happening in the portal. Like, every situation is different. Some people get bags dropped on them. Some people are malcontents. Some people are actually being treated poorly by the coaching staff. Like, you just don't know until you make some calls and talk to people. And, sometimes guys go back.
That's the other thing. Florida State had a player last week who announced he's going, and he posts the tweet on Tuesday, officially paperwork hits on Thursday, and then within 2 hours he's back. And it was clear he's a player. Now, Florida State had to cut down. Like, they had to cut down to 85. It was pretty clear. Like the Micah Pittman transfer, there's a couple of those where you're like, I see what's going on here. But that one they didn't want to lose, and he winds up staying. Sometimes it's a renegotiation. The Tyler Van Dyke rumors a couple weeks ago felt like a renegotiation to me.
Yeah, I think
there's been a lot of that going around at Miami these days.
I think the retention piece is just so important, and folks should not underestimate that. I mean, the news is out this morning that Garrett Nussmeier is going to stay at LSU, which is huge for them. Certainly a guy that you would imagine has probably received some messages and some phone calls from people saying, "Hey, man, you're way too good to be on the bench there at LSU." I've talked to staffers in the last week who were legitimately nervous about this transfer deadline. Even on guys that are grad transfers that maybe could go later on, you're still really trying to hold on and find out who is kind of whispering in their ear, and could they. I talked to one staffer who was worried that they had one of their best players was just going to ghost them at the last minute this weekend and go in. I mean, even if they're happy. Even if you've kind of done everything right for a few years in this guy and he's a starter and all that kind of stuff, you just don't know who's kind of coming into the picture and potentially offering them a lot more money than they're currently making.
Well, and that's it'll be interesting to see if just from a 30,000 point view, the coaches that have to sort of dance this delicate line of the my way or the highway thing is not going to work, unless you're at Alabama where everyone gets head coaching jobs and becomes first round picks. But you have to balance the line where the players aren't running your program, because then it gets hard to win games. You have to be clear, I'm still the authority. I'm still in charge here, but also creating a place where players want to be a part of your program because the ease and the cost of leaving is so much lower that I don't envy coaches. I've said this 1,000 times over the offseason. Best time ever to cover college football, best time ever to play college football, worst time ever to coach college football, because that line you have to dance is very, very difficult.
Well, and the world, it seems, the new world belongs to the Shane Beamers and the Josh Heupels and the Kalen DeBoers and the people who people really seem to enjoy playing for. And now even Nick Saban will tell you he's I don't know if he'd say it in so many words, but has softened a bit in terms.
He wouldn't use that word, but he has
of player management, and because he understands, he's not dumb. He knows what he has to do. Kirby Smart, they still coach him hard at Georgia, but they've gotten to the point where they get a self-selecting sample. They get players who know that's what's going to happen and know that's what they want, or feel like that works for them.
And part of that comes into, we've seen this at some schools already in the portal, is that, if you want to live off the portal, that means that you're having to do speed dating versus high school recruiting, where you develop a 2 and 3 year relationship that, hey, if I am putting my foot in your hiney every day at practice and then giving you a hug, are you going to push me away when I get that hug, after the team meal? And figuring out who can take the kind of coaching that I want to give them on the practice field. Because that's where you get in this weird era where the practice field and the facility are still kind of two different places. And if guys can't handle hard coaching, well, they're probably not going to be a great fit for your program. And being able to evaluate that, not just the talent, but the personality, and are they a fit for our program? This is where, you can fill, people with the portal, but if you're living off the portal, it's going to be very hard to vet guys and figure out who's the best fit. Who am I getting in the program? That is very, very hard.
I talked to Will Muschamp about that before the Peach Bowl, and he said, at Georgia, they make it a priority that before a player commits, they at least see a practice or two and understand this is how this works. Yeah. Or they get to see an off-season workout. They know how this works, so they're not surprised. But you're right, the speed dating aspect of the portal. You think about it. If you went into the portal this weekend, there's a very good chance you've chosen your school by the end of this week, and you've got maybe schools from all over the country that you're considering, and maybe you went on a visit or two, but you don't know. And especially right now, at the end of semesters, the workouts kind of taper off right about now. They get a little bit harder once summer starts, but stuff sort of tapers off right now. So you're not seeing exactly what this is going to look like. So you don't know what you're going to wind up in.
Yeah, and I just think when you do go ahead, Max.
In this spring period too, obviously I've been tracking this over the last 2 weeks since the window opened. And it's interesting. You do see at Alabama, at Georgia, at Ohio State just had another one last night. You do see some freshmen who are going in the portal at the end of their first year. Some, most of them are top 100, top 200 kind of recruits. I would imagine at those schools, they're kind of okay with that, right? They're going to recruit at such a
yeah.
high level. Like Ohio State lost 2 freshman receivers to the portal. That's going to happen because they take 4, and those 4 are some of the best in the country. And one of those guys has to be number 9, and one of them has to be number 10 on the depth chart here in terms of just that group. Like it's competitive situations, and so obviously it's an interesting assessment then you have to make when a freshman from one of those schools goes in the portal and he played 7 snaps last year. Like, is he a stud who just thinks he's blocked by some really good players ahead of him, some NFL players, or is it a guy that just did not fit in this kind of atmosphere?
I think this is where you get into the speed dating aspect. Is it's easy to say, oh, well, they went 7-5 last year, but their linebacker was horrible. Here's this linebacker who made 40 tackles last year and was a 4-star recruit. Well, obviously that's going to there's no simple way to tell you. It's not that simple. Like, it's just not. It just doesn't always go well. Sometimes it does. A lot of times it doesn't.
Well, and then you have the veteran players who understand that their program has recruited really well and their playing time is about to dwindle. There's a guy named RJ Moten is on an official visit to Florida as we speak. He started 10 games at Michigan last year. He started 5 games in 2021 at Michigan. But usually you either go up in starts or down, and his start total was going to go down this year because their safety room is loaded. So that's the dance you got to do. And you got to figure out who, like, that seems like the safest kind of transfer to take. Guy who is a veteran, played really well on a good team, but just got Wally pipped by somebody who's going to be maybe a 1st or 2nd round draft pick.
Yeah, I agree.
You'd be a better person to talk to about this. I'm very curious. So, like, coaches know that they have to be honest with NFL teams when NFL teams come and say, what are we getting? How much information trading is there between coaching staffs in the portal? My guess would be 0.
There's a lot more than you think. Yeah. That is like, there's not really, from talking to coaches in the past few weeks about this, like, there's not really the sour grapes thing anymore of like, don't call me about this kid. I mean, even in December, after coaches get fired, I know one coach at Texas State was getting calls nonstop from people about their players that went in the portal, like, hey, what do you think of this guy? Even though he just got fired. Like, there's a lot of that. And there's that information kind of ends up flowing both ways. And I think people kind of understand it's mutually beneficial that, like, if you're at an SEC school and you are calling about a kid who went in the portal from the Sun Belt or like Conference USA, like, that coach probably should be honest with you, because at that SEC school, you're going to send players down too, that you're going to send them their way. And they're going to expect you to be honest with them about what are we getting in this player. So yeah, you have to call about the background on character and what are the issues, what are the real reasons they're going in the portal. Sometimes when, especially like with these linemen that go in, they're going to call the coach and be like, how big is he really? Because these guys list something in their Twitter bio. Or I talked to one person last week who was like, there's this lineman who's out there is really coveted, who's listed 6'4", and it's like, no, he's 6'2 3/4, and he begged us to put him at 6'4". Like, that's a thing, right? And you just again, the speed dating piece of it is so tough because you hope to get some time with them in person, but really you've got to bring them out to the visit and pay for the visit just to really kind of find out what you might be getting with the guy. And so, yeah, that conversation between coaches, like, you got to find someone on a staff and you got to make a phone call. And there's some schools that will not make the offer, or the head coach will not extend the offer until you've called over to someone at that school to find out what the deal is.
I feel like I'd be very tempted if I was a coach, if I had a player who was in the portal that had what I've always referred to as a high turd factor, and had a bunch of offers.
Can we add HTF to the to the evaluation?
Some guy, I always like the players that have very, very low turd factors, but some guys, they just have high turd factors. And like, if my rival in the division was very interested in this guy and they called me over and said, what do you think? That'd be a tough call. Like, you know what? He's got some promise.
But honestly, it's just like our jobs. I was talking to one staffer last year about this, and he said, you've really got to get multiple sources because they said there was one, they called a coach about a kid, and the coach absolutely murdered him, said he was the worst kid ever. And then they called 3-4 more coaches who were like, no, that coach is crazy. Like, that kid's great. So it's like, you need to, it's that information trading. You need to do a lot of it and not just go by the first thing you hear.
It's funny because now they're surprised when they don't hear from the school that's taken them, because I talked to a staffer from a school that lost a player to another school. And he goes, I wish they'd have called because we'd have told him he's not that good.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we'd have told him he's not going to play for them.
Max, I feel like we've stumbled upon a good story idea. I want to read the Max Olson story on inside the information trade of the speed dating world of the transfer portal.
That is something that's in the works right now. Yeah.
It's not unlike blind or speed dating though, because you think about it, if you get set up on a blind date, what are you trying to do? You're trying to gather as much information about the person from as many sources as possible. I mean, that's really what it is. It's not speed dating, it's blind dating.
But within honestly, within a day of a guy going in the portal, he's got visits lined up. Like, especially right now when you've got to go kind of try to knock this all out like in a week and go get enrolled somewhere. Like, that's not very conducive to actually learning as much as you possibly can about a guy. I've talked to staffers at school who feel like when a guy goes in the portal, you need to offer within the first few hours they go in. And so that's a very fast process. And obviously it leads to a lot of whiffs. And I think a lot of times these staffs are just looking to meet a need. I've talked to plenty in the past few weeks I'm just looking for a defensive lineman who is a certain size. And if they are that certain size, we will bring them in on a visit. And I think if they can be a 3-tech, we will take them, and then we will find out what's wrong with them later.
Again, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you look at it, at the end of the day, you're taking somebody else's word for it. You haven't recruited the kid for 2 years. You haven't been at his high school practice, seen him on the sidelines, been in his home, talked to him on the phone, FaceTime with him for hours. You are taking somebody else's word for what this kid is. They might be right. They might be wrong. You might have a disagreement. I mean, again, it's all about perspective, and one man's trash is another man's turd factor. So we'll have to see.
High turd factor, by the way, is the greatest, because turd is the word.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
turd is the word.
Turd is the word. If a coach talks, there's a player who is causing serious problems. It doesn't matter where the coach grew up. It doesn't matter who he worked for. The word is turd. Like that is what that guy's turd.
And we've all listened. We don't need to drop any names. We've all covered them. We've all covered the guys where the coach is like,
we're
gonna deal with this turd again.
He's a turd, but I love him. Yeah.
Sometimes when you resurface in the punch bowl.
Yeah. Sometimes when you deal with the player, you know it too. You're like, boy, your teammates must not like you.
Every now and then, I can think of a handful of times where I've gone out and done stories on recruits, and I get done with an interview, and I'm like, oof.
Yeah.
Oof.
Well, and that's the tough thing about this time of year. Like in December and January, guys can go in because they're not getting enough NIL money. Guys can go in because they had a great year and they want to move up. They can go in because they had a coaching change or their assistant left or whatever, right? At this time of year, I think everyone is very suspicious. Like there are big names that go in that everybody wants, but kind of everyone's fighting over the same 20 to 25 really good players, and the rest you're kind of okay. Like we talked about the Michigan State situation. Okay, did you get beat out? Is that why you're in the portal? Are you a guy that went in because they were cutting down to 85 and you were one of their worst players? I think there's a lot of the majority of the players, the over 600 that have gone in the portal in the last 2 weeks. A lot of them are guys that were depth guys who have not started again.
Well, and Max, I'm curious about this because you were talking about you have to offer the first day. Are these in this situation all committable offers? Because we talk about that in the recruiting process of high school players where they throw an offer out, but it's not really real. You can't commit until you go to camp and they see you, and then they take you to the head coach's office and he taps you on the shoulders with his sword, or I think that's how that works. But this one, it feels like these are committable offers, sight unseen.
It depends on the player, obviously, as it always does. But oftentimes that is an offer to we will buy a plane ticket for you to come out here and take a visit. Yeah,
Gotcha.
You do need to. Certainly for the very high profile recruitments, Lincoln Riley is not telling Bear Alexander, let's see how the visit goes, and then maybe we'll talk about the
right.
But yeah, you've got to, and that's that again. That goes back to what we're talking about. At the bare minimum, we need to meet you face to face, and we need to actually see how big you are, and we need to see how you actually get along with our players. And so, I think a lot of times you've got to go through that visit piece, and maybe the offer is more of hey, just put us on your list here and consider a visit.
Max, two of my great loves Worlds colliding, college football and Married at First Sight. I love to see it. I love to see it.
Do those people tend to go back in the portal after that show, Evan?
A lot of re-entering the transfer portal after 8 weeks on Married at First Sight.
I am glad that we got here. Not necessarily, Netflix reality dating shows, but going back in the portal, because that, David, you've done a lot of work on Deion Sanders in Colorado, and we've talked a lot about what they're doing with just wholesale roster flip. Max, we had this conversation on the phone last week, and sure enough, the number hit. They are going to be at least 70 new scholarship players when they take the field, and it might be more than that. But they had
everywhere, every year, right?
Oh yeah, it's totally normal. No, but David, they had a player who they took in the winter window from Arkansas State, a tight end, who hopped back in the portal. I don't think that's part of the plan.
They've had 4 spring transfers go back in the portal.
Yes. That's not part of the plan. I don't know if the Louis luggage has a hole in it or what's going on there, but ultimately, that goes into what we've been talking about for the first 20 minutes of the show, is that it's very hard to figure out, is this guy a great fit for what we want to do and who we are? He's a great player. Sure. He can be productive. He can do all these things. But at the end of the day, you're going to the facility every single day with this guy. You're practicing with this guy every single day. You're guiding this guy. And when you have to do that 70 times, that's tough. That's tough. This is why there's so much skepticism in the coaching world, beyond fans who are, sort of what's going on. In the coaching world, you talk to any coach, there's a lot of skepticism about making it work, because they know how hard it is to make it work in the portal. And this is, are we ready to have the Deion conversation at the moment, Andy? Are we getting there?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's have the
How
Deion
much time
conversation.
you got?
If you look at what Deion is doing, okay, and you look at how he recruited at Jackson State, and you look at the caliber of player he got at Jackson State, and the caliber of player that he was recruiting at Colorado, it's like a carbon copy. It's the same type of guys. A lot of big school bounce backs that hadn't really done anything, but were a 4-star at one point in time, or were a 3-star or whatever, and went to, the Floridas, the Tennessees, the big schools. It's like they're running the same plays. But they're not getting that much higher quality of a caliber.
The thing is,
they might get a few, but not a ton.
Yeah, but we remember James Houston because he worked out.
Mm-hmm.
We don't remember everybody who didn't.
Yes. So this is where you're at. I think it's just, for all the reasons we've been talking about, it's very hard. And I know that Deion's in a spot where he has to flip the roster, and he feels like he has to do this. And certainly when you inherit a roster that's 1-11, there's a lot of room for improvement. But the degree of difficulty is just off the charts. And then you start thinking about sustainability. What does this look like in year 2? How many guys do you have to do this next year? Because you don't have that first year rule. And so you can't cut players quite as explicitly as you have been in year 1. So you're playing a really, really dangerous gamble, because you're saying, okay, we're going to go in the portal 70 times, and then these are our guys.
And your class balance is probably not working out. I mean, in a perfect world, you picked a quarter of them are seniors, or a third of them are seniors, and a third of them are juniors, and a third of them are sophomores, and then you've got your freshman class coming in. That's not how it will work out. That's not how that math will work.
Yes.
I just think it's easy to say, we got a 4-star. This guy is a 6'4", 240-pound linebacker that runs a 4.46. Okay, there's not a lot of those guys. You got some of them, but it's just not that simple. It's not that simple. You're still running a program, and evaluation means more than just the player. It's the mind. It's the mindset, and of course the oft-mentioned turd factor. You don't know.
Yeah. So somebody at Colorado had the duty of removing all the players from the roster who left in the past 2 weeks, right? So they updated it, I think, over the weekend. Here,
I've looked for a guy's bio, and it's 4.
Here's where we're at. Okay, 12 returning scholarship players from last year's team. 12 out of 84. Wow. Okay. 21 transfers. The number's actually 30 with the guys who are committed. 17 freshmen from their 23 class, and 26 walk-ons. That's all we're got right now. That's 76 players. Realistically, like if you just look at who they've got and who they have committed, they are at like 63 out of 85. And so that gets into, I think, a very fascinating issue here because we just haven't seen anyone do it. Like if you're wondering like, oh, there's got to be other like year one staffs that have had a lot of attrition this offseason,
Not
right?
like this.
There are, and they've lost 25 guys or 30 guys. Nobody has lost 58 guys.
This is what we talked about with Kansas, like post Charlie Weiss. This is David Beatty getting to spring practice, and what was the number Beatty threw out there at Big 12 Media Days that year? Was it 29?
Yeah, I thought it was 35
at spring practice.
Like that.
Or it was 35. Yeah. It was 35 scholarship players in spring practice. So that's what we're talking. And we're sure that Deion knows that FBS has a higher scholarship limit than FCS, right?
Probably yes. If someone on his staff says yes.
85 and not 63. Okay, we're just just making sure. So
and that's interesting because he may think that like, oh well, NFL has 53. Like 53 is all you need, right? And like I've talked to staffers in the last week about this. Like, how many do you actually need? And they feel like you probably need 55 to 60 scholarship players who can actually play right now, who can help you right now, to actually just be competitive. And this is not even talking about like, can you play with USC and Oregon and like Washington and these really good Pac-12 teams, but just to be competitive. But they have very specific issues with the roster too. There's nobody coming back at quarterback. There's nobody coming back at wide receiver, defensive line, cornerback. They have one returning running back. They have one returning safety. The backup quarterbacks are both true freshmen. Like there's some real, like if one thing goes wrong at a bunch of these spots, you are going to have some real struggles this year.
That's the thing with Colorado is they got some dogs. They got some players. Yeah. They're going to be really good at the skill positions.
Definitely.
But the lines, it doesn't look great at the moment because you can't build an offensive line or a defensive line out of the portal. I just don't think that's possible. You can fill a spot, but you can't build one from scratch. I don't think that's possible to build a competent line on either side. To say nothing of the offensive line chemistry, but they're just not.
Well, and also offensive and defensive linemen, the most valuable people in the portal, so they ain't coming to you.
Yes,
at
exactly.
Colorado.
Yeah,
and then the question of like Max alluded to it, Shedeur looks like a great player. If he gets hurt, like, what are you doing? Like you don't have anything.
Well, and David. Or Max, you brought up the point about the 53-man NFL roster. The difference is with a 53-man roster, you're playing with those bottom five constantly. Every week you are cycling out those bottom five to make sure there's a guy you need this week in there. And so you cut one guy and you're like, okay, just hang out. We're going to re-sign you in 2 weeks. And then you sign somebody in another position that you need because you got somebody dinged up. It's not the same thing in college football, obviously. When that person gets dinged up, you're just screwed.
Agreed. And I think you still need that. And that's where, from talking to staffers, there's a real curiosity of like, did they just go a little bit too far in how many they cut after the spring game? And obviously there are some players that chose to leave after the spring game and who are getting recruited and will have some good opportunities and stuff like that. But there's not really like you still need a core to your roster. You still need guys who like really want to play special teams. You still need guys who really want to play at Colorado. And like they've kind of purged off a lot of that and going in a very transactional direction. And this is where you get into like, so first of all, like to go take 20 plus players moving forward here from the portal, maybe some JC guys, whatever, but to take this many guys from the portal right now, there's a ton of skepticism among people in the recruiting industry about, are you going to get good enough players from this post spring window here? And then like, are you going to nail those evaluations? Because ultimately, like it is really going to matter. They're not just bodies. They're not just, we need to fill out our depth at a bunch of these positions. You need guys that you actually can trust to play and that will actually stick around.
Well, I think so the way that I understand how it played out at Colorado is that at some point, I don't know if it was during the spring or I believe it was during the spring, kind of toward the end, Deion sort of told his staff, hey, go look at your position. If you got guys that you don't think can start for us this year, let me know. And those are the guys that are going to get cut. Okay. So let's press on that question, right?
Hey, Matt, no other coach in the country did that, by the way.
Yes. That's not how the first-year coaches are operating.
Because most coaches realize that not everybody on their team can start for them, and that's okay.
Yes. So there's two things with that. Number one, if you're going to cycle the roster, how do you know if this guy is going to be better than the guy that you get? Like you're rolling the dice. If you say we're cutting this guy, well, we can get somebody better in the portal. Maybe you can. What if you can't? And secondly, there's the question of depth. Okay, this guy might not be able to start for you, but so you're going to go in the portal and you're going to say, hey, you got 3 years to play, but you know what? You can come be a backup here for a year, and we like you in 2024 and 2025. I don't think that's necessarily how that conversation goes, but that's how reality is going to play out because you only have 22 starters. So I just, again, it's so fascinating because we've never seen anybody do this before. And they're asking questions and making decisions that no one's ever made before and no one's ever asked before.
Who knows? Maybe they'll be right and we're all stupid. But they
might be.
And that's the other piece that from talking to folks last week, that there's a lot of curiosity of okay, maybe there's more of a plan to this than we can see. Maybe they have a bunch of silent commitments from guys who have not entered the transfer portal yet. There's honestly that suspicion. And lately, when more high profile guys go in the portal, there is a lot of kind of conspiracy thinking right now that maybe Colorado has lined this up. But that gives you another challenge of this, that when that guy hits the portal, when an Alton McCaskill or Zachary Franklin goes in the portal and you hear right away Colorado's on them, that makes sense.
Colorado
is everybody else in college football going to let those guys go to Colorado?
Right. Yeah. Right. Zachary Franklin can help every team in America. Every single team in America. Ohio State might be too deep at receiver to take Zachary Franklin. Everybody else could use him.
Andy, is Zachary Franklin, would he be the best receiver on Alabama's roster?
He'd be the most accomplished. I don't know. I mean, their guys are young, but I mean, you would take him right now.
I like Kobe Prentice. I don't love a lot of the other Bama receivers.
Yeah. Every school in the SEC would take him right now.
Keon Coleman goes in
every school.
And Keon Coleman considered Jackson State back in the day during his recruiting process. But if you're at LSU, you're not going to be we'll let Deion take this one. You know what I mean? You're just everybody, especially the schools that have money, they're not just going to stand by and let Colorado go take 10 best players out of the portal.
That's another interesting wrinkle to this. Colorado does not have an NIL situation where they can offer guys much of anything. The NIL deals they've had, you look at what Travis Hunter had, what Shedeur Sanders had, that's NIL as NIL was designed to be, where Shedeur Sanders is a very familiar name. He has a deal with Brady
you're
Brand.
A famous person, so we will hire you to endorse our product.
Exactly.
Yes.
The NIL as designed by collectives that has been popularized in Eugene and much of the South, Colorado does not have that apparatus set up. So if somebody says, hey, come play for Coach Prime, and somebody else says, hey, come play for this coach that you might not have heard of 2 weeks ago, but here's $80,000. Well, that's a complicated question.
I've done some research on this coach, and he seems intriguing.
Yeah. So it's just you're not playing the same game as a lot of these schools in the South.
One thing that will ensure future attrition is when you say, hey, premium portal player, come here, you'll make 6 figures. We'll figure out how we're going to get you that. And then you get there and the player says, wait a minute, I thought I was getting 6 figures, an apartment and a car. Yeah. And they're like, well, we're working on it. We're working on it. Right. That is going to ensure these guys bounce from Colorado right away if you don't deliver on those things.
So interesting question from Andrew Cooper in the chat. This is something that we've talked about a few times on the show, but now, especially with the portal closed, I think we can answer it. Is the 1-year sit rule in the SEC transfer is going to hurt the SEC in the long run? And it's not a 1-year sit rule. It's you have to be in the portal by February 1st if you would like to play for another SEC school in that coming season. And I think we can answer definitively it's not hurting them, because other than Bear Alexander leaving Georgia for USC, who left an SEC team that you thought was going to be a big contributor during this spring window to go to another conference?
Well, they're one of the few leagues that can probably do that. It's like the fact that the SEC has no exit fees for leaving the conference, right? It's like people want to be there. So, yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, that rule is more about anything else than coaches. Let's not eat ourselves, please. I think it's the coaches not wanting guys to tamper.
I've talked to ADs about it. I talked to multiple SEC ADs about it, and their feeling is they would rather play defense against 100 17 other schools than against the other 13 SEC schools.
Yes. And I like their odds in that.
Yeah, I don't think that's a rule that Greg Sankey's like, oh, whoops, is that on the books? Like, I think he likes being a leader on that. Don't you think, Andy?
I think so too. And Alabama actually challenged it last year at the spring meetings, and it didn't get any traction to change it. And as long as you're the only ones doing it, now if every conference decides they want to do that, then you're opening yourself up to an antitrust lawsuit. If I'm the other conferences, I wouldn't change my rules because I want those SEC players to come, and I want to be something different, and it's not the same. Like it just means more thing we make fun of it, but those coaching staffs would never stop tampering if that rule didn't exist.
Yeah.
Because it just means more.
Yeah, exactly. but like it's not the same in the Big 10. It's not the same in the Big 12. Yes, there's still tampering going on, but you don't see that. Like if the window was the same in the SEC as it was everywhere else, you would see guys moving from Mississippi State to Arkansas and from South Carolina to Tennessee. You would see it right now all the time.
Based on how much I hear about those schools tampering on like just starter level players, not even like all conference level players, but like just starter level players at other Power 5 leagues. Like I have to, I can say with certainty it would be absolutely bonkers if the SEC could recruit SEC players all year long.
Yeah. So this is basically a we're saving us from ourselves kind of situation.
Yes, 100%.
And I think it does help their coaches because I don't get the sense that a lot of the SEC coaches were particularly concerned. I know Xavier Henderson went in the portal from Florida last week, and he had the most catches last season. But they look at Ricky Pearsall as their best receiver. They like Andy Jean, the freshman. They've got this kid named Eugene Wilson coming in that they really like. So I don't think they're particularly crying over that loss. If Pearsall had gone in, they'd have been very upset.
I'm very curious to see if we ever see this rule challenged by a player who has a sick grandparent that they have to move closer to home to be closer to. Like we've heard that story a million times.
Oh, but what the SEC is going to say is there is a school close to your home that's not in the SEC. Go to that one.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So, but that's
Troy. Congratulations to Troy for getting all those guys.
Exactly. Yeah, the
Sun Belt. Come on the podcast.
Actually, we probably need to have John Summerall on the podcast because that defense last year was nasty.
Yep. Salty.
Right.
Speaking of nasty defenses, did you guys catch the Oregon spring game? It was interesting because we know their offense is good, and their defense made their offense look pretty rough for a half. And so I'm wondering how bad did the 19 consecutive runs by Oregon State that might have been the most humiliating thing that ever happened to Oregon's defense. I'm wondering how much that inspired some change. I know there, Max, you can speak to how many guys they got out of the portal, but they went and got like Jordan Birch from South Carolina and some other names that had played at big places. They could be very good this year if that defense has come around.
Now they're an interesting one. So they're going into year 2, obviously under Dan Lanning. They've had 32 scholarship players leave. I think he has within his ability of the head coach rule in the first year to move on from some players. Like I think Dan Lanning, as much as you'd say, man, you walk into a pretty good situation there post Cristobal. I think Dan Lanning has also like put his fingerprints on this roster pretty quickly there too at Oregon. And you'd say even for how good you think they're probably setting up to be next year, like I think, and yeah, sure, they were recruiting at like a high blue chip level, obviously before he showed up. But interesting to see like the amount of players they were willing to move on from. And yeah, they did a great job last year in the portal. Obviously, turned Christian Gonzalez into a first round pick. Bucky Irving from Minnesota turned into one of the best backs in the Pac-12. Like the talent evaluation, I think you really see like they're nailing it so far in the portal. Got Jordan Riley drafted as another guy they took last year. But yeah, I think it's a little bit scary if they're willing to move on from that many guys and bring on a bunch of guys. Like you feel like they probably know what they're doing over there.
Well, I think you see there's a little bit of SEC leaking into the Pac-12. I mean, Dan Lanning is sort of leading that charge. But, in terms of what is the standard, what are the types of guys that we're trying to recruit? Can you get those guys? We'll see. But like, I mean, even when I was out at Arizona State last month or whatever it was, Kenny Dillingham was like, listen, I got my bachelor's in football at Arizona State, but I got my master's in the SEC in the South, Florida State and Auburn. So like, they're taking some of those sensibilities. And I think Ari wrote a really good column in December about this with Dan Lanning, closing the way that he did. The SEC level of recruiting and ruthlessness has sort of begun to kind of crash the Pac-12. I think Urban Meyer brought some of it to the Big Ten, and we're seeing it sort of leak out west.
Yeah. And now one name to watch on the other side of the ball for Oregon, Tez Johnson, receiver from Troy. Bo Nix's high school classmate. There's some familiarity there too. So it's interesting because, Oregon's upgraded on defense. USC has upgraded the personnel on defense quite a bit through the transfer portal. Beryl Alexander is the headliner from this window, but they got, 3 defensive tackles in the winter window who could be very helpful for them. I mean, I would think their entire defensive tackle rotation, and it's a real rotation. It's not two good starters and then it drops off. It's a real rotation now. Like, that's how you become something different than what we've seen from Lincoln Riley's defenses at Oklahoma and USC so far.
Yeah, I mean, they've really focused their portal takes this offseason on defense, as you would expect going into year 2. I mean, Emmanuel Pregnon from Wyoming was a big get for them. He'll start at guard for them, I would think.
And then Ethan White from Florida was gonna come, and now he's not. Right. So that kind of he slides into there. And Michael Tarquin from
so they're gonna start 3 transfers on the O line this year, most likely. They brought in Dorian Singer from Arizona, who's a really talented receiver, but at all 3 levels of that defense, I think they've gotten better. Obviously they're recruiting at a high level too, but the portal takes, they've got a lot of veteran guys. They've got younger guys like Anthony Lucas, who clearly have 5-star, high draft pick kind of potential. I should add Marshawn Lloyd at running back from South Carolina. I think is an interesting piece there too.
Huge pickup.
Yeah. So I feel like that's USC. You look at their class and then there's some classes out here that have taken 25 guys and they rise up the rankings because of that. But I think the quality of what Lincoln Riley is doing, I think once again, you got an argument that this might be the best transfer class again. And, the more they win these, like Barry Alexander and Pregnon, you're like, I know there's a lot of quarterbacks coming back in the Pac-12. I know there's some very talented teams, but I feel like they're kind of too good to fail with how this is kind of setting up. I mean,
but Oregon's a problem for them. Oregon is a potential problem for them in the Pac-12.
Yeah, and Utah's a problem.
Yeah. And has been a problem. And
as you see, yes.
we do this every time, and I've tried to stop. I have. We had a whole segment on it a few weeks ago where I apologized to Utah because we always slip Utah in at the end of that conversation. Oh, by the way, in Utah, no, 2-time defending Pac-12 champs.
Yeah,
it's not. Oh, by the way, it's you got to get through Utah. So
I think the interesting thing, again, I think we're going to see this other class of recruiter start to rise. And I think Lincoln Riley is leading the charge. Hey, can you think of any maybe good transfers that Lincoln Riley has done some good things with? The idea, the archetype of the transfer whisperer, I think is going to become a much bigger thing. And there's not a better one than Lincoln Riley right now. At all.
Let me throw one at you. Another potential one. Near to you, David. You could probably,
is he
drive
coaching
over
Columbia,
to his house.
South Carolina?
Well, that's one, but there's another one who lives in your town.
Mr. Heupel.
Josh Heupel. Hendon Hooker, transfer. We'll see with Joe Milton, but transfer.
Yeah.
Brew McCoy, transfer. Their left tackle, transfer. Mincy.
Gerald Mincy from Florida.
Yeah. So they've done a good job with transfers. South Carolina, like you mentioned, Shane Beamer done a very good job with transfers. So
on a good start, but I think
the thing that is Florida State too.
Oh well, I mean, Michael Rebell's
up there, I think, with Riley in terms of just what he's accomplished over
100%.
Several years now.
I think you're right that I think in the portal era, those guys have done some great things. But I think that's the thing with Riley is he's done it for so long, dating back to Baker, I guess would be the first one.
Yeah.
Where you literally inherited a pretty good player that was a walk-on and turned him into a freaking
think about this. Lincoln Riley put 3 consecutive transfer quarterbacks 3 consecutive transfer quarterbacks went to New York. 2 of them won Heisman's. 2 of them were number 1 overall picks.
And
They're
Caleb Williams
all
is probably going to be the number 1 pick next year.
right. So, and then all of them have been or are starters in the NFL. One of them signed the richest deal in NFL history, at least for a week or so until Lamar Jackson got his.
Yeah.
But that is insane. That is an incredible track record.
So I imagine if you're in the portal and you get a call from Lincoln Riley, it resonates a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you heard of Baker Mayfield? Have you heard of Kyler Murray? Have you heard of Caleb Williams?
And they just got Eric Gray and Wanye Morris drafted over the weekend. Like those are guys they took at Oklahoma, obviously. Like they've the track record of like what we can do for you to get your career back on track or to kind of help take you to the next level and boost your stock. Like you combine that with like, hey, would you like to take an OV to USC? Like, I think it's not
come live.
It's not a hard sell for these guys.
Come take a scholarship and come live out in LA for a couple of years.
Well, and honestly, I think where we're at now with this stuff too, as much as I know when people go in and like people get very, very suspicious and point fingers and stuff when guys go in the portal, and then you immediately hear like, oh, they're going to this school. But I've heard from some of these schools that take a lot of transfers that like a lot of this stuff can be initiated on the player side, the player and the family and the third party and stuff. Like, I think at this point, when you have that kind of track record, whether you're at USC or Ole Miss or Florida State or these schools that are really doing it best, like the kids are calling you and saying, hey, if I go in the portal, I want to come there. Would you guys take me? Like, and so you get a leg up on everybody else that you're in good shape to win that battle before the name pops up in the portal.
And if you don't like, go ahead, Dave.
If you don't like what we're talking about and the current status of things, we'll just lead into another podcast episode, make them employees and pay them, because that's the only way to slow down any of this movement. It's going to be happening.
Right. You can have rules that govern player movement at that point, and
if you pay
it's a lot easier to control. So, and look, everybody's like, it's too difficult. We can't. This isn't difficult. This seems pretty difficult too. So,
Andy, I feel like it's time for you to cue up your favorite catchphrase. When people in college athletics complain about things being too hard.
Oh yeah, that's what the money's for. Exactly. And there is money coming in. Yes, thank you, Don Draper and Peggy Olson, for that incredible scene in the suitcase, which is one of the best episodes of television ever. Yes, I do love that. One more thing before we go, because we talked about this at length on Friday's show. And Max was with us, but David, I want to get your thoughts on this too, because you cover a lot of SEC stuff. I believe you just finished your SEC power rankings. I believe Alabama's number 3. Which when is the last time Alabama, other than the end of last season, when is the last time Alabama would have been number 3
for that one
in the SEC power rankings?
Well, I think this is the thing. Like, Alabama has recruited quite well. I don't know if anybody's heard about this or been following this. Alabama's recruited quite well. So the talent is there. Look, Alabama's not short on talent. But at the end of the day, when you look at power rankings and you look at, okay, what is this fall going to look like? And you look at established stars and you look at established dudes. LSU's got 2 guys on the Heisman shortlist. In Jaden Daniels for sure. Harold Perkins, I think, will have a couple huge games that get him some Heisman buzz at some point.
He might be the best defensive player in the country in terms of what he might be in terms of ceiling.
Yes. And Mason Smith is probably an All-American type talent who missed all of last year when, need I remind you, LSU beat Alabama to win the SEC West. I think when you say it, and you look at, oh, Alabama's behind LSU, it's kind of like, really? But then you say, oh, well, how is that? Well, did you last season they literally lost the division, and I don't see any reason why Alabama should be ahead of LSU, especially when you look at what LSU has coming back. They lose Kayshon Boutte, but listen, Malik Neighbors, great player. LSU is just in a spot to do some big things this year, and I think too, talking to some guys on their staff and watching the games. Obviously, Jaden Daniels from September to December, completely different player. Right. At some point in the midseason, it clicked, and now you have a whole off season with that staff where you've worked with them. You still have really good receivers. I mean, they have good depth behind Neighbors as well. I mean, Daniels, I think, still has a lot to prove as a passer, but he still has, obviously a really lethal running threat. And I think when we saw him play so much more confidently in the second half of the season, accuracy. I mean, LSU, listen, if you're looking for a national title sleeper, I don't know what the national title odds are on LSU and where they rank in that. I bet you Bama's probably higher. I'm going to guess. I could be wrong about that. LSU seems like a decent flyer.
Well, and so we always talk about the SEC, and when you talk to SEC, there's a lot of scrimmage league. It's a lot of scrimmage league. So LSU has Will Campbell and Emory Jones at their offensive tackle spots. They were true freshmen last year.
Mm-hmm.
They've had a full year now.
Like I think they bring back five starters on the offensive line. That was not very good last year when they won the SEC West. Need I remind us again?
Right.
Yeah.
And then that defensive line, you get Mason Smith back, who is an elite talent. You know, we'll see how he comes off the injury, but that's a scary bunch right there. And so that's how, like Georgia, we know Georgia's always got somebody good on the offensive line, somebody good on the defensive line. That's not going to be a problem. You know, they're just cycling up. Georgia at this point is just cycling up first round picks on both lines of scrimmage. Alabama, we're not seeing that as much now. Like Caden Proctor,
and two new coordinators.
Right, exactly. Caden Proctor, when you see him, you're like, "Ooh, that's going to be a first-round draft pick someday." Like, you know, but their offensive line, you looked at the spring game and you go, "Okay, they got to figure out left tackle. They might have to figure out center." And I don't see those questions at LSU. I don't see those questions at Georgia. I don't see those questions at Tennessee. Now, Alabama gets Tennessee and LSU at home this year. But if that's the best argument you can make, that's a problem. And
somehow, Andy, we had this whole conversation without even talking about the Alabama quarterback situation.
Well, and that's what we talked about that all day on Friday. But yes, I want to get into that with you.
And it's like, listen, Tyler Buchner is probably an upgrade, but is he a magic pill that but that's maybe. Like if you told me that Milroe or Simpson would be better than him by the end of the season, I would absolutely believe you. We don't really know what we've seen. We know that what we saw in the spring game, when you see bad spring game performances, you always sort of take it with a grain of salt. But what you don't take with a grain of salt is how the coach talks about it. And when the coach is like, yeah, that was not good, we need to look in the portal, and then takes a big time portal guy like 2 weeks later, that tells you he's not in on these guys. So that's surprising because we saw a lot from Milroe last year when Bryce Young got hurt. And Ty Simpson obviously was like an all-world recruit. And so for them to be in this position is very surprising. That's not something that I would have expected when the season ended. I thought they were in a pretty good spot when Bryce Young left. Nick Saban clearly believes that's not the case.
Guys, when was the last time we had an Alabama team that was rolling with nobody believes in us?
Oh no!
Powerful. That's true. We might be there.
We just gave the national title.
I think the last time we saw that was before the SEC championship in 2021,
which they destroyed Georgia in that game.
Demolished Georgia, and
then they played Georgia again and lost. So
that's the last time that the Alabama disrespect machine was truly humming. And now we're seeing it in the offseason. So congratulations to Alabama on their 2023 national title.
Exactly. It is a powerful thing because, you know, whereas Nolan Smith can apparently convince everyone that people said Georgia was going to go 7-5, we're actually predicting Alabama not being as good as Georgia or LSU. And yeah, Nick Saban's going to turn that into something.
What was the term that he used? The really weird quote after the SEC championship came where he was like, thanks for the, what was it? The yummy
rat poison. The yummy rat poison.
But wasn't it the opposite of rat poison? Or was it the rat poison that people were inflicting on Georgia?
I think it was, I think it was, we were rat poisoning Georgia. We made the supercut. Me and Ari made the supercut that they used in their motivational video.
That's always good.
So that was shown to the players before the game with me and Ari like, Georgia's going to win this easy. Alabama doesn't stand a chance.
I'm glad I wasn't on the pod that week, but I was with you. I thought that was going to be because Alabama had been limping through the whole season. I was like, here comes the reckoning. Here comes the reckoning. Sure. Georgia about to wreck shop. Nope. Bryce throws for 800 yards against the greatest defense in the history of college football. as this weekend's draft showed. So,
golly. Let's talk a little bit of draft. Obviously, we've got plenty of draft content out there, and I'll be with Dane Brugler again on Prospects to Pros this week. But Howie Roseman, the Eagles GM, attempting to recreate the 2021 Georgia defense. He's drafted Keely Ringo since we talked on Thursday night after the first round. So
and
it
he
is
traded
really
for DeAndre Swift.
Yes, he traded for DeAndre. It is really amazing, but I can't argue with the philosophy. They all know each other.
I'm not an NFL GM. I've heard of worse strategies, I have to say, than like, oh, hang on. So this defense that was probably the best defense that college football has seen in a decade, maybe longer. What if we just get all those guys and then put them on our defense
and let them play together? Yes,
that seems like a pretty good idea.
Let's take them, and then we'll add Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham to them.
So, and then we'll have Jalen Hurts getting it done on the other side of the ball. So, yeah, again, I a step short of the Super Bowl last year, but it strikes me as a sound concept rather than perhaps drafting a quarterback that everyone who watched college football said, I don't think that guy's very good.
So, one weird draft thing that happened this time that I don't know, is this an anomaly or is this something that's gonna keep happening because of the transfer portal and the way player movement is going on? The first 47 picks came from the Power 5. Cody Mock from North Dakota State was the first non-Power 5 player selected. That's wild.
How many of those guys transferred up, Mac? Because I'm curious if this is a anomaly, like you said, or if this is a portal issue. Do you know how many? Do you have off your hand, Max? How many of those guys transferred up?
Osiris Torrance went from Louisiana, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
He was 59th pick.
That's
if there's not a
Dan
ton.
Henley
I think it might
really
be
about
Washington
it.
State. Kobe Turner
if it's
went
not
from Richmond to Wake Forest, but not many. Really,
Yeah,
just
if there's
only
not a half
three out of the
dozen
top
guys
100.
that transferred up, I kind of feel like it's just sort of a weird thing. And we'll see next year.
So,
but I didn't know how many Jabril Coxes were roaming around out there.
First round, I'm looking right now. Jordan Addison transferred from Pitt to USC, and Jahmyr Gibbs transferred from Georgia Tech to Alabama. But obviously, that's Power 5 to Power 5.
Yeah.
Everybody
Dalton
else,
Kincaid, San Diego to Utah.
That's okay. So that's the only one, and everybody else was at the school they signed with out of high school. Which we just spent an hour talking about the transfer portal. Guess who does the best?
Apparently 3-year starters get drafted. Apparently that helps you a little bit. Honestly, Andy, I was going through it over the weekend. So in the last year's portal cycle, going into the 2022 season, about 2,000 scholarship FBS players went in the portal and transferred. Okay. You guys want to guess how many of them got drafted this weekend? Out of 2,000 guys?
I'm going to say 17.
20.
Okay.
I win.
Good job.
Yeah, you were under too.
That's truly,
right
as much as we hype, and look, a lot of them will land as undrafted free agents. Some of them will make the league. I'm not saying all of them are bust or anything like that, but that's truly like when we talk about the portal and like trying to find NFL guys. It's truly 1% of the guys in the portal are like NFL draft pick type guys, at least in terms of a year from now, right? And so it's just it's very like we hype up a lot of guys that go in. A lot of those guys went undrafted over the weekend.
So I like to refer to it as
the Malik Zaire corollary, that every player when they leave their school becomes roughly 20 to 25% better than they were at their previous school. I think we're seeing a little bit, maybe slightly less of that in the portal era because it's like you can't hype him over a year when he's sitting and you see it like immediately like, oh, this guy's not all that. Like, I think like Zaire is the poster child for that, and we still see some of that, but like, it's still Max. I think we've talked about it. I think you can fix some things. Like I think at the end of the day, thesis statement of this show: the portal is a dice roll, and if you can roll it 4 times on your depth chart and hit 2, you're feeling pretty good. If you've got to roll it 20 times, okay. If you got to roll it 70 times, okay. Like we'll see.
That luggage might all be Louis. That some of that luggage might be what you found, by the side of the road.
For the just for the record, my luggage came from Sam's Club. It's Hayes, and it has given me 10 great years. I love that luggage. It's the Lane Johnson of luggage, I have to say.
I would plug my luggage, but we don't do free ads, do we, Andy?
That's exactly right. So, David, you're saying your luggage started out as a quarterback and then grew into an offensive tackle?
It's hardy, it's sturdy, and you know what? It gets the job done.
That's beautiful.
So, about 20% of the guys that got drafted, I ended up counting it for the whole thing. About 20% of the guys that got drafted transfer at some point in their career. I think that number will probably go up here over the next few years.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, maybe the focus should be on the 80%, not the 20% here, you know?
Unless we need to do a show, because then we can spend an hour talking about it.
That's
so thank you.
Let me tell you,
Transfer Portal.
Let me tell you why Peyton Thorne is about to be the next #1 pick in the draft. I got a 10-minute monologue.
Guys, I'm getting Will Levis vibes from Peyton Thorne. Let's go.
Oh. No, hey, I dare you put out a way too early 2024 mock draft with Peyton Thorne in the first round. Do it now.
That sounds
somebody
good.
will. Before we started the show, we found one where they were evaluating the class of 2024 quarterbacks, and they had Sam Heward on the list and they had a Washington logo next to his name, and they did not have Michael Penix Jr. on the list. Maybe someone should tell them. I don't know, but just remember, all that stuff is for entertainment only. The transfer portal is not for entertainment only, but it's not the cure-all you think it is. But we thank the transfer portal for today's episode. We'll talk to you later.